In the glass and steel heart of the financial district within the city's most exclusive restaurant, there were two unspoken rules. Rule 1, everything must be perfect. Rule 2, if Mr. Damien Sterling walks in, you disappear. You don't make eye contact. You don't speak unless spoken to. You become a ghost, a silent pair of hands, because Damien Sterling didn't just own the skyscraper the restaurant was in, he owned silence. He owned fear. For years, every single staff member had followed these rules. They had watched seasoned chefs tremble and veteran managers pale. They had all avoided the rude, tyrannical billionaire CEO until the new waitress. She didn't know the rules, and even if she had, she was about to teach Damien Sterling that some things like human dignity could never be bought. L'Étoile d'Or wasn't just a restaurant, it was a statement. Perched on the 95th floor of the colossal Sterling Tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the sprawling city below. The air inside smelled of money, a delicate fusion of white truffle-aged leather, and the faint, clean scent of ozone from the state-of-the-art air purifiers. Everything from the crystal silverware to the velvet on the chairs was meticulously curated to project an aura of effortless astronomical wealth. For the staff, however, the effort was anything but. It was a high-pressure, high-stakes ballet of perfection, choreographed by the formidable manager, Matteo Rossi. Matteo, a man whose tailored suit seemed permanently molded to his frame, ran his floor with the precision of a military general. But even he had a commander-in-chief, he feared. "Listen up, new girl Liam," a senior waiter with tired eyes whispered to Camilla Hayes as she polished a row of Zolto wine glasses until they were invisible. It was her third day. I'm only going to say this once. If you see a man in a dark custom Brioni suit, and trust me, you'll know it's custom with a Patek Philippe on his wrist and a look like he's personally judging the carbon atoms in the air you breathe, you make yourself scarce. That's Mr. Sterling. Camilla paused her reflection, faint in the crystal-clear glass. The Mr. Sterling. The one who owns all of this? Sophia, another waitress refilling salt shakers nearby, shuddered theatrically. They call him the Sterling Shark. He doesn't just eat here. He hunts. He looks for flaws. A speck of dust, a steak, cooked 1 degree over a shadow of a water stain on a glass like that one. She pointed a manicured finger at the glass in Camilla's hand. Last month, he had a bus boy fired, on the spot, for sneezing, quietly, 2 floors down in the kitchen. Camilla's brow furrowed. She'd heard rumors, of course, stories of Damien Sterling's legendary temper, and impossible standards were whispered throughout the building, from the corporate offices on the 100th floor down to the loading docks in the sub-basement. But she had assumed they were exaggerations, the kind of folklore that builds up around men of immense power. "Surely that's not," she started. But Matteo clapped his hands sharply, his voice cutting through the hushed dining room. "Positions, everyone. Table 12 is arriving. Liam, your lead. Sophia, assist. Camilla, you're on water and bread service for this section. Stay sharp." His eyes found Camilla's for a fraction of a second, and in them she saw a clear, unspoken warning. "Don't mess this up." Camilla nodded, her heart giving a little thump of anxiety against her ribs. She needed this job. It wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline. Just 6 months ago, she'd been a university student studying art history. Her future mapped out her life, cushioned by the comfortable wealth of her family. The Hayes name had once meant something in the world of architecture and design. Her father, Robert Hayes, had been a brilliant, if perhaps too trusting architect. Then came the fall, a catastrophic betrayal by her father's business partner, Richard Beaumont, had wiped them out. Beaumont, a man her family had trusted for decades, had leveraged their joint company into oblivion with a series of fraudulent deals leaving her father with nothing but lawsuits and heartbreak. The scandal had been swift and brutal. They lost the house, the savings, the prestige, everything. Her father's health had collapsed under the weight of it all, and now the medical bills were piling up alongside the tuition fees for her younger sister Chloe's special school. So Camilla had traded her textbooks for a serving tray. She sold her designer clothes, moved into a tiny studio apartment, and learned to smile politely while her feet ached and her mind raced with financial calculations. Her pride was a luxury she could no longer afford, but her dignity, that was another matter entirely. That was the one thing Richard Beaumont hadn't been able to take. The evening was a blur of seamless service. Camilla moved with a quiet efficiency that belied her inexperience. She was a quick study, graceful and observant. She anticipated needs before they were voiced, her smile genuine, even when her feet screamed in protest. Matteo watched her from a distance, a flicker of approval in his guarded eyes. The girl had potential. Then, at precisely 9 p.m., a change rippled through the restaurant. It was a subtle shift in atmospheric pressure, a sudden dip in the ambient temperature. The host at the front desk stiffened his professional smile, freezing on his face. Matteo's posture became ramrod straight. The whispers died. Camilla, on her way back from the kitchen with a fresh linen basket, saw Liam's face go pale. "He's here." Liam mouthed his eyes wide as he discreetly steered a young busboy out of the main walkway. Through the grand entrance, Damien Sterling strode in. He wasn't a large man, but he occupied space, as if he were. His presence seemed to suck the very air out of the room. The dark suit fit him like a second skin, accentuating a lean, powerful frame. His hair was black, his jaw sharp, and his eyes were a startlingly cold, piercing grey. They swept across the room with a look of profound boredom and disdain, missing nothing and approving of less. He was followed by a weary-looking older gentleman, Arthur Coleman, his long-suffering executive assistant. They were seated at table 1, the prime corner booth that was perpetually reserved for him. It was in Camilla's section. Matteo intercepted her, his voice a low, urgent hiss. "Just water, Hayes. Let Liam handle everything else. Do not speak. Do not make eye contact. You are a ghost." Understood. Camilla's throat felt dry. She nodded her hands, clutching the linen basket. She watched as Liam approached the table, his movements unnaturally stiff. She could see the slight tremor in his hands as he presented the wine list. Damien Sterling didn't even look at him. He waved a dismissive hand, the usual. And tell Chef Dubois the last time the risotto was grainy. I trust he's corrected his technique. The insult delivered in a flat, bored monotone was more cutting than any shout. Liam scurried away, looking like a mouse that had just escaped the claws of a hawk. Camilla took a deep breath. Ghost. She could be a ghost. She picked up the crystal water pitcher, the ice clinking softly. She approached the table, keeping her eyes downcast, focusing on a spot on the floor just beyond Mr. Sterling's expensive Italian leather shoes. She poured Arthur Coleman's water first. Flawless. Then she moved to Mr. Sterling's glass. Her hand was steady. The water flowed in a silent, perfect arc. And then it happened. As she began to pull the pitcher back, Damien Sterling shifted in his seat, extending his leg without warning. The corner of his knee bumped her arm. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible contact, but it was enough. A single small splash of ice-cold water, no bigger than a coin, arched over the rim of the glass and landed silently on the sleeve of his billion-dollar suit. Silence. The world seemed to stop. Arthur Coleman froze, his eyes closing for a brief second, as if in prayer. Matteo across the room looked as though he'd just witnessed the apocalypse. Camilla's heart hammered against her ribs. Her training, Matteo's warning, every instinct for self-preservation, screamed at her. Apologize, grovel, disappear. Damien Sterling slowly, deliberately lowered his gaze from the window to his sleeve. He stared at the small, dark spot of water. Then his cold grey eyes lifted, and for the first time locked directly onto hers. The sheer, unadulterated contempt in that gaze was a physical force. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The look said everything. You are worthless. You are incompetent. You are nothing. Camilla felt a hot flush of shame, followed by an immediate surprising surge of something else anger. Not at her mistake, but at his reaction. At the palpable arrogance, the assumption that a drop of water was a personal, unforgivable offense. Her family had lost everything. Her father was sick. She was working herself to the bone for her sister, and this man was going to ruin her night, her job over a droplet of water. The ghost vanished. Camilla Hayes, the daughter of Robert Hayes, the woman holding her family together with sheer will, stood in her place. She met his gaze. She didn't cower. She didn't look away. "My sincerest apologies, sir," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the heavy silence. She placed the pitcher down and offered him a clean, folded napkin from her apron. Her tone was professionally contrite, but her eyes held no fear. "Allow me to get you a dry cloth." It was the defiance, not in her words, but in her spine, that stunned him. He was used to terror, to fawning, to panicked apologies. He was not used to being looked at as an equal. He didn't take the napkin. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable, a flicker of something other than disdain in those icy depths. It might have been surprise. It might have been fury. For a long-charged moment, the billionaire CEO and the new waitress were locked in a silent battle of wills over a drop of spilled water. And for the first time in a very long time, Damien Sterling had the unsettling feeling that he might not win. The silence at table 1 stretched into an eternity. Camilla could feel the weight of every eye in the restaurant on her, could feel Matteo's panic radiating across the floor like a heat wave. But her own gaze remained locked with Damien Sterling's. She had made a mistake, an accident, and she had apologized for it. She would not, however, apologize for her existence. She would not shrink and grovel as if she had committed a federal crime. Damien was the first to break the contact. He gave a slow, deliberate blink, as if rebooting his entire system. A muscle feathered in his jaw. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His words, when they came, were quiet, each one a perfectly formed shard of ice. "Get me your manager," he said, not to Camilla, but to the air in front of him. He dismissed her as if she were a piece of furniture that had suddenly malfunctioned. Camilla felt a cold dread mix with her defiance. This was it. The public execution Sophia had warned her about, but she simply nodded, her expression professionally placid. "Of course, sir." She turned and walked, not scurried, towards Matteo, who was already power-walking towards the table, his face a mask of horrified apology. "Mr. Sterling, my deepest, most profound apologies for the clumsiness of my new staff member." Matteo began practically bowing. "Her wages for the evening will of course be docked to cover the dry cleaning of your jacket." Camilla stopped dead in her tracks. Her wages. The $50 she was planning to put toward Chloe's physical therapy textbook for a drop of water that would evaporate in 10 minutes. The injustice of it was a slap in the face. Damien Sterling finally acknowledged Matteo's presence with a flick of his eyes. He ignored the groveling. His gaze slid past the manager and landed once again on Camilla, who was now standing a few feet away, her placid mask cracking to reveal a flicker of indignation. He had seen it. "That won't be necessary, Matteo," Damien said smoothly, a cruel hint of a smile touching his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "I don't want her money." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "I want her to be the one to serve my table. For the rest of the evening." A collective silent gasp seemed to pass through the staff. Arthur Coleman, who had been studying the condensation on his water glass with intense focus, looked up in surprise. Matteo stared, utterly bewildered. This was not in the script. The sterling shark didn't play with its food. It devoured it and moved on. "Sir," Matteo stammered, "but Liam is our most experienced. Was that a question?" Damien's voice dropped a full octave, and the temperature in the room plummeted with it. "No, sir. Of course not, sir." Matteo turned to Camilla, his expression a mixture of terror and pity. "You heard him, Hayes. You're on table one. Do not make another mistake." Camilla's mind reeled. This wasn't a reprieve. It was a punishment, a drawn-out form of torture. He was going to sit there and watch her, waiting for her to slip up so he could bring the axe down with maximum satisfaction. The other staff looked at her as if she were a lamb being led to the slaughter. She squared her shoulders. Fine. If he wanted a show, she would give him one. "Yes, Mr. Rossi," she said clearly. She walked back to the table, picked up a menu, and stood beside Damien Sterling. She didn't flinch under his intense, critical gaze. "Will you be having your usual selection?" "Mr. Sterling," she asked, her voice a perfect model of professional decorum, "or would you like to hear about tonight's specials?" Arthur Coleman choked on a sip of water. In the 15 years he had worked for Damien, no server had ever had the audacity to ask him about the specials. It was an unwritten rule that Mr. Sterling was not to be bothered with such trivialities. Damien stared at her, a strange, calculating light in his eyes. He was testing her, and she was meeting his challenge head-on. This was a game, and she had just made a move he hadn't anticipated. "Describe the seared scallops with saffron risotto," he commanded, his tone daring her to falter. Camilla didn't miss a beat. She had memorized the menu front to back during her downtime. Of course, the diver scallops are pan-seared to a perfect golden-brown crust, leaving the inside tender and sweet. They're served over a bed of creamy acquerello risotto, infused with delicate Spanish saffron, a hint of white wine, and aged Parmigiano Reggiano. The dish is finished with a drizzle of basil oil and microgreens for freshness. Her description was flawless, her delivery confident. She hadn't stumbled, hadn't stuttered. She had simply answered his question. A long silence followed. Damien's expression was unreadable. "Fine," he finally bit out. "Bring me that, and a bottle of the 98 Chateau Lafite. Let's see if you can handle that without bathing me in it." The barb was meant to sting, but Camilla refused to let it. "An excellent choice, sir. I'll have that decanted for you immediately." The rest of the meal was a masterclass in tension. Camilla moved around the table with a preternatural grace and focus. Every plate was placed silently, every utensil perfectly aligned. She poured the priceless wine with a surgeon's steady hand, the red liquid breathing into the decanter without a single wasted drop. All the while she could feel Damien Sterling's eyes on her, tracking her every move. It was like performing surgery under a microscope. He tried to trip her up. He would ask a sudden obscure question, just as she was pouring wine. Who was the architect of this building? Myron Kopelman, in partnership with Sterling Properties, sir, she answered without looking up. The spire was a later addition designed by a different firm. He would shift his chair just as she approached, trying to throw off her path. She adjusted seamlessly her movements, fluid and unhurried. He complained the soup was a degree too cool. She took it back without argument and returned with a new bowl, checking the temperature herself with a kitchen thermometer before it left the pass. Through it all, she never lost her composure. She was polite, efficient, and unflappable. It was the armor she had been forced to build over the last 6 months, and it was serving her well. But what unnerved Damien the most was that beneath the professional veneer, there was no fear. He could see it in her eyes when she momentarily met his gaze. There was exhaustion, there was stress, there was a deep, simmering frustration, but there was no terror. She wasn't afraid of him. As she cleared the main course plates, Damien spoke again, his voice dangerously soft. "You're new here. Where did you work before this?" "I was a student, sir," Camilla replied, stacking the plates with quiet precision. "A student of what advanced tray carrying?" The insult was cheap and direct. Arthur shifted uncomfortably. Camilla paused for a fraction of a second. She could feel the eyes of the other staff on her back. "Art history," she said, her voice even. "I studied the value and meaning people assign to objects. It's quite fascinating what can be learned from what a society or a person chooses to elevate." Her response was a polite, intellectual checkmate. She hadn't just answered his question, she had subtly turned his entire world of priceless objects and curated luxury into an academic specimen. For the first time that evening, Damien Sterling was left speechless. He stared at her, his mask of cold indifference finally cracking to reveal a sliver of raw, unadulterated shock. This waitress, this clumsy girl who spilled water on him, was not just resilient. She was intelligent, and she was using that intelligence as a weapon, one he didn't know how to defend against. The game had changed. This was no longer about a billionaire terrorizing a waitress. It was a duel, and Camilla Hayes, armed with nothing but a serving tray and an unbreakable sense of self, was proving to be a far more formidable opponent than he could have ever imagined. The night of the spilled water became a legend among the staff of L'Etoile d'Or. Camilla wasn't fired. In fact, something far stranger happened. The following Tuesday, Damien Sterling returned, and when the host approached his table, he uttered a sentence that sent shockwaves through the dining room. "Tell the art history student I require her services." And so it began. It was no longer a one-time punishment. It had become a routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Damien Sterling would arrive at 9 p.m. sharp, take his seat at table 1, and demand Camilla. The staff took to calling it the Gauntlet. Matteo, torn between the terror of displeasing his most important patron and the burgeoning awe for his new waitress, simply acquiesced. "Just keep doing what you're doing, Hayes," he'd said, running a hand through his already perfect hair. "Whatever it is, it seems to be working. Or at least you're still employed." Damien's strategy had shifted from overt intimidation to a subtle, relentless war of attrition. He was testing her, pushing her, searching for the crack in her armor. Each dinner service was an intricate, cruel exam. One night he would complain about the lighting. "There's a glare on my water glass. It's distracting. Fix it." Camilla, without a word, would walk over to the control panel, discreetly dim the overhead spotlight by an almost imperceptible 2%, and return to the table. "Is that better, sir?" He would squint, annoyed that she had actually solved the non-existent problem. Fine. Another night he would order off-menu, demanding complex dishes he knew the kitchen wasn't prepared for. "I want a Dover sole meunière, but the butter must be clarified from grass-fed Normandy cows, and the lemon must be from Amalfi. I'm sure Chef Dubois can manage that." Camilla would listen patiently, her notepad in hand. "I will convey your exact specifications to the chef, sir. However, sourcing those specific ingredients may take a moment. Would you care for an aperitif while you wait?" Her calm acceptance of his impossible demands infuriated him more than any argument would have. She never said no. She simply presented the reality of the situation with unshakable politeness, forcing him to either back down or look patently ridiculous. More often than not, he would grunt and revert to the menu. The psychological games were the worst. He would try to unnerve her with personal, probing questions designed to make her feel small. "Art history," he mused one evening, swirling a blood-red burgundy in his glass. "A useless degree for a useless class of people who can't survive in the real world." "Is that what happened to you? Did you find you couldn't hack it?" Camilla was arranging his silverware for the next course. She didn't look up. "On the contrary, sir. I find it has excellent applications. It teaches you to look for the story beneath the surface of things, to understand the difference between price and value." She placed the fish fork down with a soft, definitive click. The implication was crystal clear. His attacks grew more pointed, more personal. He had clearly done some light digging. "Hayes," he said one night, the name sounding like an accusation. "That's an old name in this city. Any relation to Robert Hayes, the architect, the one who built monuments to his own ego, and then lost it all?" Camilla's hand tightened on the back of a nearby chair, her knuckles turning white. That was a low blow. The reference to her father, the dismissal of his life's work, the casual cruelty of bringing up their family's ruin, it was designed to break her. For a moment, the air crackled with her silent fury. The professional mask was gone, replaced by the raw, protective anger of a daughter. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, she allowed a sliver of her own contempt to show. "My father is a brilliant man who valued trust and integrity," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "He built things that were meant to last. Some people in this world are builders, Mr. Sterling, and some are just demolition experts." The word struck him with the force of a physical blow. He reeled back slightly, his grey eyes widening in genuine surprise. She hadn't just deflected his attack. She had turned it back on him, accusing him of being a destroyer. Arthur Coleman, sitting opposite, suddenly found the ceiling patterns intensely fascinating. Damien stared at her, the silence stretching. He had wanted a reaction, and he had gotten one, just not the one he'd expected. He had expected tears, a stammered defense, perhaps even for her to quit on the spot. He had not expected a precise surgical strike that hit at the very core of his own insecurities. Damien Sterling, the man who inherited an empire and quadrupled its value through ruthless acquisitions and corporate takeovers, was he just a demolitions expert? He said nothing for the rest of the meal. The game had stopped being amusing. For Camilla, these nights were emotional and physical torture. She would go home to her cramped apartment, her body aching her mind, replaying every barbed comment, every subtle insult. She would stare at the ceiling, wondering how long she could keep this up. The $50 tip he invariably left, always a single crisp bill, as if to remind her of the wage docking incident, felt like blood money. But then she would look at the photo of her smiling sister Chloe on her nightstand, and she would know she had no choice. She would get up, soak her feet, and prepare her armor for the next battle. The other staff watched the ongoing war with a mixture of terror and reverence. They started leaving her little things, to help a bottle of water stashed for her in a service station, a chocolate from the pastry kitchen, a quiet word of encouragement. "You're a rock star, Camilla. Liam whispered to her one night as she passed. They had stopped seeing her as the new girl and started seeing her as their champion, the one person who refused to be broken by the monster on the 95th floor. But the constant pressure was taking its toll. One Thursday, after a particularly grueling service where Damien had sent back his steak 3 times for imagined imperfections, Camilla was in the staff locker room rubbing her temples. A blinding headache was pulsing behind her eyes. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother. Chloe had a bad fall at school. Doctor says she needs the new leg brace ASAP. It's 2800, I don't know what we're going to do. Camilla's blood ran cold. 2800, it might as well have been 1,000,000. She sank onto the bench, the weight of the world crashing down on her. The tips, the wages, every penny she had was already allocated. She was failing. Despite the brave face she put on for Damien Sterling, despite her nightly defiance, she was losing the war that truly mattered. Just then, Matteo came into the room. "Hayes, Mr. Sterling is asking for the check. And he's asking for you." Camilla took a deep, shaky breath. She splashed cold water on her face, straightened her apron, and re-entered the lion's den one more time. But as she walked towards table 1, the armor felt different. It was heavier, more brittle, and for the first time, she felt the dangerous, terrifying urge to just let it all shatter. When Camilla reached table 1, the mask was firmly back in place, but something behind her eyes had shifted. The usual guarded resilience had been replaced by a quiet, simmering desperation. She placed the leather bill folder on the table without a word. Damien was observing her, his sharp eyes, missing nothing. He had seen the way she walked out of the locker room, the slight tremor in her hands she was trying so hard to conceal. He had pushed, and he sensed he was finally near a breaking point. A cruel, triumphant part of him savored it. "Is something wrong, Miss Hayes?" he asked, his voice laced with mock concern. "You seem distracted. I hope my steak wasn't too complex for you to process tonight." The condescension layered on top of the crushing weight of her mother's text message was too much. The carefully constructed dam inside her began to crack. "The steak was fine, sir," she said, her voice tight. "Was it?" he pressed, leaning forward slightly. He signed the credit card slip with a flourish. "You know it takes a certain kind of person to excel in the service industry. Deferential, eager to please. Perhaps you're just not cut out for it. There's no shame in that. Some people are destined to serve others to lead." He was baiting her, poking the bear one last time. He expected her to bite back with her usual sharp intelligence, or perhaps finally to crumble. He didn't expect the look she gave him. It was a look of profound, weary pity. Camilla took a small breath. "You're right, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the restaurant's hum. "I'm not cut out for this." She looked him directly in the eye, and the raw, unfiltered truth of her struggle poured out. "But I'm here. I'm here because I have to be. Because my family needs me. Because my sister needs a new leg brace that costs more than I make in 2 months, and my father's medical bills are extensive." She wasn't whining or asking for sympathy. She was stating facts, her voice imbued with a quiet dignity that was more powerful than any shout. "You come in here twice a week and you play your little games. You test me with your steaks and your wine and your insults, and I let you, because this job, this deferential position, is the only thing standing between my family and utter ruin. So you can sit there in your $100,000 suit and judge my performance, but you have absolutely no idea what it means to actually fight for something. You fight for market share. You fight for a higher stock price. I fight for my sister's ability to walk without pain. She finally broke eye contact, her gaze dropping to the signed check in her hand. Your total is taken care of. Thank you for your patronage, Mr. Sterling. Have a good evening. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Damien Sterling sitting in a state of absolute, profound shock. Arthur Coleman was staring at his boss, his mouth slightly agape. Every word Camilla had spoken hung in the air, charged and immutable. She hadn't just revealed the crack in her own armor, she had taken a sledgehammer to his. His world of power and control was built on the assumption that everyone had a price, that every action was a calculated move in a game of leverage. He understood ambition, greed, and fear. He did not understand this. He did not understand the quiet, ferocious power of necessity and love. Her words had stripped away his wealth, his power, his carefully cultivated cruelty, and laid bare the emptiness of his own battles. You fight for market share. I fight for my sister's ability to walk without pain. He felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation in his chest. It was a hollow, aching feeling. Guilt. He watched her retreat, her shoulders straight, her head held high, even as he knew she was breaking inside. He had wanted to see her break, but now that he had, he felt nothing but a deep, burning shame. He glanced down at the check. He had, as usual, left a $50 tip. The gesture, once a symbol of his power over her, now felt petty and insulting. Arthur, he said, his voice hoarse. Yes, Mr. Sterling, Arthur replied, treading carefully. Find out everything about her, Damien commanded, his voice low and intense. The family, the father Robert Hayes, the sister Chloe, the partner who ruined them, Richard Beaumont. I want to know everything. Now, Arthur nodded. Right away, sir. Damien Sterling sat there for a long time after Arthur had left the bustling restaurant, fading into a distant hum. He had set out to break the new waitress who had dared to stand up to him. But in the end, with a few quiet, devastating sentences, she had completely and utterly broken him. The war of attrition was over, and he had lost in a way he had never conceived possible. The cold, impenetrable fortress he had built around himself had been breached not by force, but by a simple, heart-breaking truth. Arthur Coleman was more than an assistant. He was a fixer, a repository of secrets, and the closest thing Damien Sterling had to a conscience. When Damien gave an order like, "Find out everything," Arthur knew it meant deploying his discreet but incredibly efficient network of private investigators and information brokers. Within 24 hours, a sleek, encrypted tablet was placed on Damien's vast obsidian desk. The file was titled, Hayes Camilla Ann. Damien opened it, his hands feeling strangely unsteady. He spent the next 3 hours utterly absorbed, the city lights glittering unheeded outside his penthouse office window. The story that unfolded was worse than he had imagined. The report detailed the meteoric rise and catastrophic fall of Hayes and Partners, a boutique architectural firm, celebrated for its innovative and human-centric designs. It included glowing articles about Robert Hayes, praising his vision and integrity. Then the narrative turned dark. It laid out in cold, hard detail the systematic fraud perpetrated by Richard Beaumont. Beaumont had used the firm's sterling reputation to secure massive loans for non-existent overseas projects, siphoning the money into offshore accounts before bankrupting the company and leaving Robert Hayes to face the legal and financial fallout. The most damning piece of information was the name of the bank that had so eagerly provided those fraudulent loans, blinded by Beaumont's charisma, and the Hayes and Partners name, a subsidiary of Sterling Holdings. His own company? A cold knot formed in Damien's stomach. His company's lax due diligence, its hunger for a profitable deal, had been the weapon Beaumont used to destroy the Hayes family. He was not just an indifferent spectator to her family's ruin, he was tangentially, unintentionally complicit. The report continued. It detailed Robert Hayes's subsequent heart attack, the mounting medical debts, and the loss of their family home. It had photos of the cramped apartment Camilla now shared with her mother. It included a detailed breakdown of the costs for Chloe's specialized school and the orthopedic treatment she required for a congenital hip condition. The $2,800 for the new brace was highlighted along with a doctor's note stressing its urgency. He saw a picture of Camilla at her university graduation, beaming her father, looking proud and healthy beside her. It was dated just 1 year ago. The transformation from that carefree young woman to the guarded, weary-eyed waitress he tormented twice a week was stark and gut-wrenching. He had misjudged her completely. He had seen her defiance as arrogance, her resilience as stubbornness. He never once considered it was survival. He had assumed she was just another person in his orbit, a minor character in his grand story. He now understood that she was the protagonist of her own tragedy, fighting a desperate battle he had been casually making more difficult for his own cruel amusement. The final section of the report was on Richard Beaumont. Beaumont, after a brief performative disappearance, had re-emerged. Using the stolen funds, he had established a new investment firm, Beaumont Capital, and was now a flashy second-tier player in the city's financial world. He was known for his aggressive, hostile takeover tactics, and in a twist of bitter irony that made Damien's blood run cold, the report's final line noted that Beaumont Capital was the anonymous entity currently attempting a hostile takeover of a struggling but innovative green tech company that Sterling Holdings was in the final stages of acquiring. It all clicked into place. The past and the present, his world and hers, were colliding. Richard Beaumont, the ghost who had destroyed her family, was now his business rival. Damien closed the tablet, the screen going dark. The silence in his office was deafening. He leaned back in his chair, the shame from the night before, returning with a vengeance now compounded by a deep, unsettling sense of responsibility. For years he had cultivated his ruthless, unapproachable persona as a shield. After a bitter betrayal in his early 20s by a woman who had faked affection to get to his family's money, he had decided that trust was a liability and kindness was a weakness. He pushed everyone away, testing their loyalty with cruelty, believing it was the only way to ensure no one could ever hurt him again. He had become a demolition expert, just as Camilla had said. But his shield had also blinded him. He had become the very thing he despised a user, a man who inflicted pain without thought or consequence. His carefully ordered world built on logic and leverage was now in chaos. He felt an overwhelming, unfamiliar urge, the need to fix something. Not a company, not a deal, but a life he had actively made harder. But how a simple apology felt hollow. Handing her a check would be a gross insult, confirming her worst assumptions about him, that he believed money could solve anything. It would be an assertion of power, not an act of contrition. He needed to act, but he had to do it carefully. He had to help her without her knowing, to restore a piece of what was taken from her family, without damaging the one thing she had left her pride. He picked up his phone and called Arthur, his voice devoid of its usual arrogant bite. "Arthur," he said, "I have 2 tasks for you. First, I want you to set up an anonymous educational trust. Fund it with $250,000. The beneficiary is to be Chloe Hayes. The stated benefactor is a patron of the arts, honoring her father's architectural legacy. Make it untraceable back to me or this company." "Yes, sir," Arthur said, a note of surprise and approval in his voice. Second, Damien continued his gaze falling on the information about Beaumont Capital. Get me our corporate legal team and the M&A division. Conference call. In 10 minutes. I want to know everything about Richard Beaumont's finances. I want to know where he's vulnerable. I'm moving up the acquisition timeline. A cold, hard glint entered his eyes, one that hadn't been there before. It wasn't the look of a bored tyrant anymore. It was the look of a hunter. Richard Beaumont had destroyed one family. Damien Sterling was about to make sure he never had the chance to destroy another. The game had changed, and he was no longer playing for sport. The following Tuesday, a nervous energy permeated L'Etoile d'Or. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. Would Camilla still have a job? Would Damien Sterling even show up? When the clock struck 9 and the front doors remained closed, a collective sigh of relief began to circulate. But at 9:15, he walked in. He looked different. The usual air of bored arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, intense gravity. He didn't sweep the room with a disdainful gaze. His eyes went straight to the host's stand. "Is Miss Hayes working this evening?" he asked, his voice low. The host, stunned by the polite inquiry, simply nodded. "I will be at my table," Damien said, and walked to the corner booth alone. Arthur was not with him tonight. When Camilla was told, her stomach twisted into a knot. She had replayed their last conversation 1,000 times, convinced she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She expected to be fired the moment she approached the table. Taking a deep breath, she picked up a water pitcher and walked toward her fate. She reached the table and began to pour his water, her movements practiced and steady, belying the frantic beating of her heart. She was waiting for the verbal axe to fall. It never came. "Thank you, Miss Hayes," he said so quietly she almost didn't hear it. She froze pitcher in hand. In all the weeks of their strange ritual, he had never once thanked her. She looked up and met his eyes. The cold, icy grey was still there, but the contempt was gone. In its place was something she couldn't quite decipher, a deep, turbulent combination of regret and something else. Respect. "You're welcome, Mr. Sterling," she whispered, her voice faltering for the first time. The rest of the service was surreal. The tests were gone. He ordered directly from the menu without any impossible modifications. He didn't complain about the lighting, the temperature, or the food. He simply ate, watching her with that same unreadable, intense expression. The silence between them was no longer a weapon, but a space filled with unspoken words. Camilla found it more unnerving than his open hostility. She didn't know the rules of this new game. As the meal concluded, he did something else unprecedented. "Camilla," he said, using her first name. It sounded strange, almost foreign, coming from his lips. "Please sit down, for a moment." She stared at him, bewildered. "Sir, I can't. I'm on duty. I am the owner of this building and the restaurant's best client," he stated, not as a threat, but as a simple fact. "I am telling you to sit. No one will say a word." Hesitantly, she slid into the seat opposite him, perching on the edge of the velvet cushion. She felt exposed, out of place. He looked at her, his hands clasped on the table. "What you said last week. You were right. About me. About the nature of my battles." It was as close to an apology as a man like Damien Sterling could get. It was a concession, a surrender. Camilla didn't know what to say. "I was upset," she offered weakly. "I shouldn't have been so unprofessional." "No," he said, his gaze unwavering. "You were honest. It's a quality I've come to realize is in very short supply." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I cannot undo the damage that was done to your family. But I want you to know that I am addressing the man responsible, in my own way. Before she could process this cryptic statement, her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. She instinctively glanced at it. It was a text from her mother, but this one was different. It was a string of joyous, incoherent emojis, followed by a message. "Camilla, you won't believe it. A lawyer called some anonymous arts foundation set up a trust for Chloe. In Dad's name. It covers all her medical bills and school tuition, all of it." "It's a miracle." Camilla's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears, blurring the face of the man sitting across from her. A miracle. An anonymous foundation. In her father's name. Her tear-filled eyes lifted to meet Damien's. His expression was neutral, but his gaze was heavy with meaning. He knew. Of course he knew. He was the miracle. She opened her mouth to speak, to ask, to accuse, to thank, but she didn't know which. He preempted her. "You are an intelligent, resourceful, and remarkably resilient woman, Camilla. You are wasted here." He pushed a business card across the table. It was his private contact card, stark white with his name and number embossed in black. "My company could use a person with your integrity, not in food service, a real position in my executive office as a strategic analyst. Your perspective would be valuable." Camilla stared at the card, then back at him. A job offer, a way out, a complete life-altering change of trajectory offered by the man who, just a week ago, was her tormentor. Her mind was spinning. "Why?" she finally managed to ask, her voice choked with emotion. "Because for the first time in a decade, someone told me the truth," he said simply. "And because my company was, however, unintentionally a party to what Richard Beaumont did. The bank that funded him was ours. This is not charity. It is perhaps a long overdue course correction." He stood up, leaving the signed bill on the table. The tip section was left blank. This time, the lack of a tip felt like a gesture of respect, a refusal to continue their old dynamic of master and servant. "The offer is real. Think about it," he said. Then he turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Camilla Hayes sitting in his booth, a miracle on her phone, a new future on the table, and the bewildering realization that her greatest enemy had just become her most powerful and enigmatic ally. A week later, Camilla Hayes walked into the Sterling Tower, not through the service entrance, but through the main lobby's gleaming marble atrium. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform, but a simple professional navy blue dress she'd bought at a consignment shop, an armor of a different kind. The job offer had been both a lifeline and a dilemma. Accepting it felt like a form of surrender, a concession to his power. But refusing it felt like letting pride stand in the way of her family's future, a luxury she still couldn't afford. In the end, the desire to provide a stable life for her mother and sister, and a burning curiosity to understand the man behind the monster, won out. Arthur Coleman met her in the lobby, his usually weary face lit with a genuine smile. "Miss Hayes, welcome. Mr. Sterling is expecting you." He led her to a silent, high-speed elevator that opened directly into the CEO's office. It was a vast, minimalist space, with one wall made entirely of glass, offering the same breathtaking view as L'Étoile d'Or, but from an even greater height. Damien was standing by the window looking out at the city. He turned as she entered. "Miss Hayes." "Camilla," he said, nodding to a chair. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Sterling," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm here to accept your offer. On 2 conditions. A flicker of the old arrogant Damien appeared. "I don't typically negotiate with new hires." "I'm not a typical new hire." She countered her newfound confidence, surprising them both. "First, I will be paid a fair market salary for the role of strategic analyst, not a cent more. This is a job, not a gift. Second, whatever you are planning for Richard Beaumont, I want in. I want to be there when the man who destroyed my family faces the consequences." Damien studied her for a long moment, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile, and it completely transformed his harsh features. "Deal," he said. "Welcome to Sterling Holdings." What followed was a whirlwind. Camilla was a ferociously quick study. Her art history background, which Damien had once mocked, proved to be her greatest asset. She saw patterns where others saw chaos. She understood the stories behind the numbers, the human element in cold, hard data. She worked directly with Damien, her desk in a small office adjoining his. Their relationship was strictly professional, yet charged with the unspoken history between them. The staff on the executive floor whispered, wondering who this mysterious woman was, who had the CEO's ear and could speak to him with a frankness no one else dared. Camilla in turn began to see the man behind the myth. She saw his relentless work ethic, his razor-sharp intellect, and the profound loneliness that clung to him like a shadow. He was still demanding, still intense, but the pointless cruelty was gone, replaced by a drive for perfection that he now applied to himself more than anyone else. The main event was always Richard Beaumont. Damien's legal and financial teams had systematically dismantled Beaumont's empire. They discovered he had built his new company on the same fraudulent principles as before, creating a house of cards. They prepared a case for the SEC that was airtight. But Damien had saved the final move for himself. He orchestrated a meeting with Beaumont under the pretense of discussing a merger, a final, tempting piece of bait. The meeting was in the main boardroom of Sterling Tower. Damien requested that Camilla be there to take notes. When Richard Beaumont swaggered in oozing false charm, he didn't even recognize Camilla, who sat silently at the side of the room, her face impassive. He saw her only as part of the furniture. He launched into his pitch full of bluster and lies. When he was finished, Damien didn't speak. He simply looked at Camilla. It was her stage. Camilla stood up. "Mr. Beaumont," she said, her voice ringing with clarity in the silent room. "My name is Camilla Hayes. My father is Robert Hayes." The color drained from Beaumont's face. He stared at her, sputtering his bravado, instantly evaporating. I don't. You used my father's good name to secure fraudulent loans from a Sterling subsidiary." Camilla continued, her voice cold and steady, laying out every detail of his crimes with damning precision. "You bankrupted his company and destroyed his health. You built your new life on the ruins of my family, and now the game is over." As if on cue, Damien slid a file across the vast mahogany table. "This is a copy of the evidence we've submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission, Richard. It details every crime. The authorities should be at your office by now." Beaumont stared at them, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. He looked from Damien's cold, triumphant face to Camilla's calm, resolute one. He had been outmaneuvered, dismantled, and destroyed. The demolition expert had been demolished. He was escorted out by security, a broken man. In the aftermath, a new quiet settled between Damien and Camilla. They had closed a chapter, righted a terrible wrong. Standing by the boardroom window, looking down at the city, an unspoken truce had evolved into a true partnership built on a foundation of mutual respect. "What you did," Camilla said softly, "giving my family a second chance destroying Beaumont. Thank you." "Don't thank me," Damien said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You were the one who changed things. You taught me the difference between having power and using it for something that matters. You reminded me that some things aren't for sale." He finally turned to look at her, a hint of vulnerability in his grey eyes. You held up a mirror, and I didn't like the man I saw. So I decided to become someone else. Someone worthy of the sterling name. The future was unwritten. Their story was far from a simple fairy tale. It was a complex, messy, and real journey. But as they stood there high above the city, it was clear that the rude billionaire CEO and the waitress who stood her ground had not just changed each other's lives, they had saved each other. And so a story that began with a spilled drop of water ended with the complete rebuilding of two lives. It's a powerful reminder that behind every title, every fortune, and every uniform, there is a human being with a story. Camilla Hayes wasn't just a waitress. She was a warrior fighting a battle no one could see. And Damien Sterling wasn't just a monster. He was a man trapped in a prison of his own making. Their journey shows us that true strength isn't about how much you can intimidate others, but about the courage to stand your ground with dignity. It's about the incredible power of a single moment of honesty to shatter years of hardened cynicism and create a new beginning. What do you think? What would you have done in Camilla's place? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved, you please give this video a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the depths of the human heart. Thank you for listening.